first article we wrote on this topic of resilience was back in 2003. And that was before we had, and I'll say this without trying to be glib, without the benefit of a lot of disruptions that illustrated so many of the difficulties. You know, we were inspired by the problems, the terrorist attack in 2001, but we hadn't seen Katrina or so many of the, Hurricane Sandy, or so many of the tsunamis, or so many of the other disruptions. Anyways, what I'd like, thank you very much, Bindia, for that kind introduction. I'm going to come down here because my job is not to talk so much, but is to start a discussion. And before I do that, I do want to say a few things. I want to say thank you very much for having me here. I'm really humbled and honored to be here. I used to have a real job. I came from industry. Now I work in academia. But I remember how important it was to, what it was like to be in industry and the challenge of having products that you have to make every day, and that drumbeat of, making your numbers and satisfying the customer. And it's not easy. So I understand it's not so easy to take time away. I appreciate you doing that. And again, having been there, I honor those who are in the workforce, who are doing that, making the products, designing them, and figuring them out, how to get the supply chains to be much more productive and effective than they have been in the past. Now, you're all here. Bindia made the suggestion earlier that the community is why we're here. You wouldn't be here unless you thought it were important. But what I'd like to do is start asking you the question is, why is it individually? Why are you here? What are you here for? Bindia outlined what she expects this group to be accomplishing, at least set of high, lofty goals. But I'd like to start a discussion with you. So what are some of the motivations for you being here? Why are you here? And I'm going to walk around and I'll hand a mic to those who volunteer and probably to some who don't volunteer, and just ask you to share your own thoughts. Who would like to get us started? Now, and ResLink folks are not permitted to speak. All right, I'm going to start in the back with Eric.
Sure, thanks, Jim. My name is Eric Dwinells. I'm with Bose Corporation, and I guess why we're here is that we want to continue to learn in this. We're on a journey, and when we started this whole process out, it was a lot of figuring out what we didn't know, and I think we're still there. And so we're hoping that through these kinds of councils and the sharing of ideas and so forth, that we can take our program to the next level as we interact and do some benchmarking with folks.
And we had a hand up here. Yes, all right. Yes.
Hi. Lydia Holquist from NetApp. I think just to add to what you were stating is sharing best practices in a candid environment, that safe environment here, and so that we can learn from each other.
Okay, great, thank you. Who else? Oh, right.
Hi, my name is Mike Lamberg. I'm with Boston Scientific Corporation. Just quick, who else is in kind of the medical device that's here? Okay, yeah. So it's kind of fun to, for us, because whenever we go to conferences and things like that, it's only medical device, right? And then it's nice to kind of branch out. So I'm here. So I've known ResLink for a while, but we're not a user, so we're still working on that. We're definitely in the between the A and the B there, working on it. But I think what the challenge we're having now, and it's a good thing and bad thing, and you kind of mentioned it, Jim, I call it, we're kind of in a time of peace. There's nothing out there really that's kind of burning down our walls from a supply side, right? But as soon as something happens, everybody says, why don't we have a program, right? So the good news is we can kind of, adopt and design a program and without getting swayed. And what I mean by this is Boston Scientific is guilty of that. In 2008, when we had the recession, we designed a risk program that was all around financial, right? What's the financial health of our suppliers? And it was just that really one-dimensional. And then, of course, when the economy improved, it kind of melts away, and that happens, right? So there's nothing like that happening now. So we're not going to be swayed a certain way, or like, when the tsunami in Japan, all of a sudden it's like the program is all about our Japanese suppliers. So that's good. The bad thing is we don't have that juice behind us at that top level, right? Well, why do we need it, type of thing. So that's our internal challenge here. So definitely here to hear the stories of how people kind of got over, that momentum and, selling it to their own organizations. Everybody says sounds great, we'll do it, but when it comes down to actually doing it, then it's like, what's the return, and it's hard to get those dollars.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Others? How about this side of the room?
I'm Rachel Yabbitt. I'm at Palo Alto Networks, and I kind of forgot the question, though. It's What is our motivation, why we're here? So we are early adopters of Resilink. During the time of 2008 and over those next few years, we were a startup company, and so we were affected by 2008 economic downturn, as well as the tsunami and the Thailand floods. And it sort of just made us realize that, we have an opportunity here to kind of get in on the ground floor while we're still small and implement that. So we're here today to continue with that. I'm in the middle of implementing my processes. I've been doing this for about a year now. So we advocate resiliency in the supply chain, and we definitely support Resilink in their endeavors. So I'm here to continue to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Oh, yes, okay.
So one of the reasons that I'm here, because we are also early adopters, Joe Carson with Juniper Networks, but also to see what's going to happen with this whole risk management thing and resiliency. We've seen it extend to conflict minerals and even other aspects of supply chain visibility that I think are pretty key. So I think this is a cool opportunity that we need to recognize. We're in the kind of the birth of a star, and to be part of that and to see where it's going to go is actually going to be very, very interesting, I think.
Bill Hall from the company formerly known as Chrysler, now Fiat Chrysler Automobiles US, or FCA US. So what I look at this group here is an opportunity to capitalize on creating shareholder value and shared value or societal value. The shareholder value is that risk management, and what I do a lot of today is sustainability, so environmental, social, governance, human rights, but making it more than just a defensive mechanism, avoiding risk, avoiding bad things, but figuring out a way to create value by having a competitive advantage in the form of effective risk management, resiliency, and so on. So that's the shareholder value, but ultimately we're solving society's problems by running a good private enterprise. And it's what I've come to really appreciate is the collaboration basis across sectors, across countries, using tech and academic and industry practitioners and NGOs and governments as well to solve the bigger problems. And the way we do that is together. So we need private enterprise, we need innovation, but we also need the collaboration and the common passions. So I'm glad to be here and really honored to be a part of it.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Everybody else? Well, I think it's fascinating just listening to the breadth of responses, ranging from folks who are getting started to folks who have a lot of experience, to folks who are trying to solve a problem, to folks who are trying to solve society's problems, and to do good things, not just for our companies, for overall society. And that's what this group, that's among some of the reasons why this group is convened. It sounds like there's, for most of us, as we can see from the polling that Bindia has started, is that there's still a lot of progress that we each need to make. And so, given that, I want to ask a question of you and see how you would respond to this. Let's say your chief operating officer corners you and says, "Is our supply chain resilient?" How would you respond to that? Where is that? So, a hidden response is probably the best one for that kind of answer. No, that was it. Okay, there you go.
I'm not sure. That's how I would respond. I don't know if it's resilient. No, right.
How would you think about that?
I'll stand up. By the way, I was forced to come here because I'm an ex-Cisco resiliency person, so we are all here to be here. Where's Jane? So in looking at your supply chain, there's multiple aspects of understanding its resiliency, and the identification of risk and what risks they are at, and then strategies, which is really where my thinking is around this is, we can all do better at identifying those risks to financial health. Somebody mentioned operational risk in terms of disaster and continuity of those suppliers or transportation hubs and all that. But then what are the strategies? I'd like to see the community talk more and think more, and smart folks like yourself from MIT think more about, the other guy behind you, about the strategies of actually becoming more resilient, not just recognizing the risks up front, which is really important, and you got to go through that. But But that's where I was hoping, in terms of answer to the boss of, are we resilient? It's I don't know, because first we have to identify all those risks, of which there's gray area there. The fog of war is certainly involved, and then only then can we become resilient in terms of developing strategies to try to mitigate those risks.
Great, thank you for your answer. Anybody else want to take a crack at how you'd answer that? Okay, hold on a second. Blaine?
Yeah, Blaine Strong with Amgen. I think when I think about the question, there's no one answer that you can give to answer it. You can tell someone you're working on it, and that's where we're at. We're in the D, operationalizing our processes. And in terms of managing your risk program, your parts, your suppliers, you know what you know, and you're only as resilient as the information that you have at hand. So from that question, I'd say from our tier 1 suppliers, we know what we know and we know where our risks are, and we're actively working to mitigate that. But it's the hidden unknowns, as the gentleman referred to earlier, that you can't give an answer to. It's the tier 2 providers and everyone converging potentially on a singular tier 2 provider that you have no idea. And that's the path that we're now going after, is to get those upstream supplier dependencies mapped and identified. And as part of the previous, walkabout, that's one of the things that I'm here to learn, what other companies who are in the D area as well as others who've mapped their upstream suppliers, and how are they being successful in getting that information from them more rapidly. So, we know what we know and we're managing what we know, but it's the unknowns that are still the hidden risks to the company and from a resiliency factor.
Okay, great. Thanks, Blaine. Anybody else? Yeah, right up front. Robert?
Hi, I'm Bob Bowman, Managing Editor, Supply Chain Brain. I'm just wondering, isn't that just half a question? I mean, you could say to your CEO, yeah, we're resilient. We have 4 suppliers for every single part in 4 different parts of the world. We have a year's worth of inventory stocked away at like half a dozen different DCs around. Sure, we're resilient. The question is, not only are you resilient, but what it's costing you. You always are going to bump up against the cost-benefit analysis. No matter how much you speak the gospel of resilience, there's always going to be a point, is there not, at which you have to face reality. And that's a question I always have when I ask companies about how far are they willing to go based on economic realities, because the CEO has to worry about that as well.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Anybody else? So I think you've all unmasked that it was kind of a set-up question. It's unfortunately, that's the question that many of you probably have already had to answer. And the answer is not a simple binary yes or no, because it does depend on the situation. And there are other factors you do have to take into consideration. Well, what's your risk preference? How much are you willing to spend? And it really does depend on the extent of the disruption that organizations might suffer. Has anybody here tried to measure your resilience? So one way to think about it is, are we resilient? Like you suggested, it depends. Well, can you measure resilience? How many people here have made some attempt at measuring resilience in your organizations and are willing to admit it? Oh yeah, Joe, you guys, can I ask you to just talk a little bit about how you start thinking about that?
The way I'd love to be able to answer that in a year or two is 7.2, and we're going to be moving to 7.8 this year. So we're just starting to put into place a number of metrics, but we've already started to look at, and I imagine a lot of you folks are doing some of the same things, where you're looking at your components and the risk associated with each of those components. You can start developing kind of the hierarchy of how that math would roll together. And we're hoping one day to kind of roll that up into one master number, kind of pull it through. In the meantime, we're putting in place a number of metrics to try to understand the sub-elements of that. How many single source components do we have as a percentage of our supply base, and how can we move that needle? How many sole source suppliers do we have? And then how do we have mitigation strategies for each of those, and how can we do that better next year than we did in the past year? So beginning to attempt at that, would love to get that into some master number that we can measure ourselves against year after year, so we can develop a way to know we're making progress.
Who else raised their hand, boldly raised their hand, said they were trying to, made some attempts? Okay, great. 1 second. Thanks, Matt.
My name's Matt Mills. I'm from EMC. Yeah, we've put a number of metrics together, not only using the ResLink data, but also across other risk dimensions. The challenge is, when you talk about rolling up into one number, the issue we found with, when you look at social environment responsibility versus the business continuity risk versus some of the product compliance risk versus conflict minerals, when you roll it all together, it's really hard it really muddies the waters. So our challenge right now is not so much quantifying. We think we've done a pretty good job quantifying, but it's how do you drive goals both in separate programs as well as across your supply chain to lower the risk in the most impactful areas. So the quantification part, we think we've figured out. It's just the action part that's the challenge and the goal setting part that's the challenge.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else? All right. So I think that I'm going to be considerate of time. Let me just make a few comments reflecting on what I've heard each of you and collectively say. So there's clearly some motivation and interest in learning from each other and improving our own organizations. And we can see from the poll that Bindia did earlier that there's a spectrum, a range of expertise and experience in this domain. But we still are challenged to answer those questions that we will get from our senior executives. In some ways, we want to be able to answer those in a succinct manner that the executive could understand. But ideally, we'd like to have that senior executive knowledgeable enough not to ask that question, to ask a different question. And then also to be knowledgeable enough and informed enough to be able to understand what the more critical factors are, to drill deeper, as Bob was suggesting, to understand, hey, there are some costs of that. Or, and I forget your first name? Yeah, Isaac. Isaac had said that you have to consider a bunch of other factors. And as this gentleman up front, our ex-Cisco friend, said, there's a lot of other things to consider. It's not a binary answer, but that's what's being asked of us. So I think that that starts to lead and really sets the table for the challenge for this particular group. You know, there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom in this group. There's a lot of progress that we all need to make in this particular domain. Despite all the progress that has been made, we still have the challenge of having executives that don't really understand the world in which we live and in which their organizations operate. So I think that that sets a challenging goal for this particular group. I'm excited to be part of it. Again, I'm honored to be in this particular group. And I think that there's a lot of great progress that this group can make and will make going forward. You know, we can think about, as this poll indicates, there's a broad range of the maturity level of different organizations when it comes to supply chain risk management. And I think we'd all like to see that maturity level evolve and grow. And I think that we're challenged for how we do that. I think my colleagues are going to be speaking next about some ways to move towards that. And so again, this is a little bit frustrating, I think, because we're just starting that conversation. I would like to continue this and learn about your successes and the challenges. Certainly there are many, and many that we'd like to share. But let's have this be the beginning of a conversation that we continue and work that we do together going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wayne. Are you going to? Oh, okay. So thank you very much for your willingness to participate.
Thanks a lot, Jim.